So I thought we could do it like that if you want, and I can just ask you questions.
Yeah, that works.
Um,
Do you want to use this video?
yeah, if you don't mind. I mean,
I,
or the audio at the very least.
let me see. Fuck it, I don't care.
That's the attitude, man.
Yeah.
All right. So the big questions. The first question I always ask people is probably the biggest one. I would say it's probably the most either the simplest or the most complex, depending on who you are. What's your name? Who are you?
My name is Anthony Reese Schneider. Well, I've spent the last 8 years as a commercial editor and editing film and television stuff, and mainly commercials. Some very high-end clients. I kind of did what I set out to do in that regard. I've worked on major feature films. I've worked, spent the last 2 years like cutting almost exclusively like major fashion campaigns, which is kind of weird because I don't care about fashion at all. It's just kind of what I landed in, and I ended up cutting like 8 or 9 campaigns for Gucci and a couple for Calvin Klein and bunch of big stuff. And so I kind of got to the point where I felt like I hit a ceiling a little bit, and I was still very much like unhappy with that, with just what I was doing. Like I didn't want to do it anymore. It wasn't fulfilling. Everybody that I worked with, or most of the people that I worked with, I felt like, I don't know how these people got their jobs. These people have no idea what they're doing. I thought that would get better, like as I got bigger clients. It absolutely doesn't get better. It's almost like the bigger clients are more clueless about what's going on. Everybody wanted to undercut you. Nobody wanted to pay for shit. Producers literally get paid to figure out how to pay you as little money as possible. That's their job. So the whole thing is just like the epitome of like the culture that I hate, essentially, you know, like, so it's funny because like I kind of over the past 4 years have been waking up to what I would probably consider to be like my true self, all the while sort of perpetuating like materialism and consumerism, like directly through creating content for these brands, you know, and selling these things and this lifestyle to people. So it's been an interesting, very, very dynamic sort of game that I've been playing a little bit. But anyways, that was a little bit of a tangent.
Not at all. Not at all. That's what I was saying. That's the first question. And you know, sometimes you get a one-word answer and other times you get a story, and I like it either way. So
yeah, but I mean, I grew up in Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, Ohio area. I've had a pretty interesting sort of life, I guess you could say. I've lived in very sort of wealthy, like white Catholic bubble of a suburb, and then I've also lived in some super sketchy like inner city poor, you know, neighborhoods that I couldn't even really walk around in outside. And I went to a public art school. I've been in art school since I was in the 8th grade, which is a pretty unique situation. I went to college in Chicago. I went to an arts college. I majored in film. We didn't have any sports. We didn't have any Greek life. You know, we didn't have any of that shit. I partied my ass off for 5 solid years in downtown Chicago. And then I moved to a farm in Nashville and started writing country music. And that's where I got my start in the entertainment industry, really. And yeah, I've been a ski bum 3 different times in my life, in Colorado and Wyoming. I have lived in LA now for 4 years. I did a stint in the Arkansas River Delta. Like, I've kind of been around quite a bit since I was 18, and I feel like I am one of those people that like I kind of take on the identity of a lot of my environment. So like when I was in Chicago, I was a DJ and I was in the nightclubs and I was doing that whole thing. And then when I moved to Tennessee, I put on my, you know, camo trucker hat and my cowboy boots and like, you know, did that whole thing and played my banjo on my patio while I was drinking Jim Beam and dipping tobacco, you know, like the whole thing. And then when I'm in Cincinnati, I'm like this weird, like kind of ghetto person because Cincinnati's just like super ghetto. And now I'm in LA and I'm like a fucking crazy hippie.
Is that the culture of where you're at in LA, or is
Pretty
that just
much, dude.
that your real self coming through?
I mean, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, you know, Venice is definitely one of the weirdest places in the country, which I love because I've always loved weird shit, and I've always been, you know, the super creative guy that's interested in all the things, and yeah, so it definitely allowed me to step into that a little bit more for sure.
Cool, man. So you've had a lot of life experience. You've been from coast to coast, north, south, east, west. You've done a lot of different things, man. So how did all of those things and all of those places lead you to where you're at now with the Neverland tribe?
I mean, I feel like it's sort of like a culmination of all of my life experience, sort of merging into one project. I felt the same way about the last big project I was working on, which was actually a music tech startup that I worked on from 2017 to 2019. I'd never started a business before. I've never built anything like that before. I had this idea of starting this blog to showcase transformational music. And that turned into like me creating this app that was going to solve the problem of musicians not getting paid. And it was going to solve, you know, that it was going to solve the Napster problem, essentially. I spent 2 years building it. I had 2 people working for me. It was all bootstrapped from the ground up. I spent months like researching the music industry. And I've been a musician since I was 6 years old. And it's been a part of my life story the whole time as a professional hobby, essentially. But I could never figure out how to make money doing it, especially now. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna solve this problem. And so, yeah, I had this team. I had the whole concept fleshed out. I had an engineer, you know, building prototypes for me. We had a whole like launch campaign to raise some money, and I was taking meetings with investors. And basically, at the end of the day, we realized that nobody was going to use it, just based on the testing that we were doing and the data that we were getting. But I guess my point is that, you know, that for me, I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. This is the culmination of all of my life experience into one thing, because it took the music knowledge, it took the film and video knowledge. You know, I worked for ad agencies my entire career, so I've been in that space of, how do we sell this? How do we brand this? What does this messaging sound like? How do we write this copy? You know, like all of that shit I've been directly involved with for almost 10 years. And so I put all of that into Render. That was the name of the music tech startup. And now I feel like I'm even more sort of evolved past that now with Neverland Tribe, because I'm cutting even more to the core of what I'm sort of passionate about, you know, which is promoting this lifestyle that is rooted in self-love instead of self-destruction. And under that umbrella, I get to play in all of the worlds that I like. So, yeah, I've done a lot of shit. I've been involved with a lot of different organizations that were working on very interesting new things and ideas. And it's all a part of this thing now.
You've rolled everything into this project, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. And the main difference is that it's mine. Most of the other projects that I've worked on have been other people that I've been working with or working for. And ultimately, I always sort of left feeling like, oh, they didn't listen to me, essentially. They didn't let me they didn't let me contribute in the way that I really wanted to. And so there was sort of this feeling of being stifled a little bit. There was this feeling of really like me feeling like I had a better idea to do it. Like I had a better way to do it, that they just, that wasn't the way that they wanted to do it. And so now I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do my own thing. And then I don't have to worry about any of that shit.
Totally. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you've got the music, you've got the video production, you've got the music production, and obviously a love of music. But where does the sort of spiritual transformational thing come in? Like, I get the sense that at some point in your life, probably before this started, you had maybe an experience or maybe some realizations that kind of led you to, like you say, shirk that materialistic, superficial culture that you were immersed in. So I'd be interested to hear what happened to you to make you go off the beaten path and to strike out on your own, if you will.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever actually fully answered that question before. So,
well, it's an honor to be the one who, the first to hear it. So,
yeah, I mean, okay, so I'll just kind of give you a rundown of like my relationship with religion, or, whatever you want to call it. I guess I baptized and confirmed Roman Catholic. I grew up, attending Catholic Mass every Sunday for the most part. I went to Bible school, when I was a kid. I don't ever remember a time where I was in church and I felt like I truly understood why I was there. It was more of an annoyance than anything. And then when I was in middle school, I sort of switched to this like non-denominational, like Christian sort of mega church vibe. And I got involved in the youth group there, playing music. And I remember I loved that place. I had made friends. I was like, oh, we get to like hang out at church instead of just like going and being in this super disconnected world of the Roman Catholic, experience. And I remember specifically, like, they would do these prayers where they would be saying something along the lines of like, oh, Jesus, please speak to these kids and let them know that you're here, or something along those lines. And I would be sitting in there just begging to hear something, just begging, like, please God, I'm here, I'm ready, like, give me a sign, talk to me, whatever. And fucking nothing ever happened. And,
well, something happened, my friend, but maybe not what you were expecting.
Right, not what I was expecting. And then, like, at some point, the youth leader that I was really tight with, he ended up like not showing up one week, and we were all just kind of like, what happened to Brian, And it turned out that like something happened with him and his girlfriend, and the church was just like, you can't come back. I don't know, it was something stupid. He like had sex with her or something, and then I don't know, something like that. And so, or maybe he got her pregnant or something. I don't know. But regardless, it was like one of those times where, any organization that would be focused on supporting humanity should have stepped in and been like, we got you. And instead they were like, sorry, bro, you're going to hell, you know? And I was just like, okay, this sucks. Anyways, at that point I kind of like started rebelling against, you know, everything. And this was also like shortly after my parents got divorced. So it was sort of that, you know, teenage years of rebellion, and like started partying and all that stuff. And in college I was like a hardcore atheist. I was like, when you die it's just black, that's it, we're animals, like whatever. And yeah, and then, you know, I don't really know what the thing was that sort of started bringing me back a little bit, but I think I've always just been curious. That's probably one of my favorite words, because yeah, I feel like I've always just been curious about most things, but also mainly very curious about like the big questions. You know, like even when I was an atheist, I spent a lot of time studying science and, you know, learning about different perspectives. And I think I started realizing that like even science is limited, and also the farther that I sort of dove into science, the more I realized that like at the end of the day, most of the big questions, they're kind of just like, oh, I don't fucking know. Yeah, we don't know. And also we're like finding shit out that contradicts other shit that we know.
Oh man.
And like ultimately we're not sure what the fuck's going on. So I had to look elsewhere, you know, for answers. And I would say like fast forward like 5 years or so to me sort of landing in Los Angeles, and I was just at a point in my life where I had just realized that I didn't feel like I had a reason to love myself. And I really had that realization of being like, oh damn, like that's kind of fucked up that I feel that way, you know? And regardless of why I felt that way, when I landed in LA, there was this building in Venice that I had walked past a few times, and it's this old church, but it has these really crazy, dope, like street art murals covering the whole thing. And I had always been curious again about like, what's that? You know, that's kind of unusual. And just coincidentally, my dad was coming into town to visit me. And he's like old school Kentucky boy, you know, he's been working every day since he was 12 years old, never left the town he, you know, grew up in, and fairly conservative for the most part. And I'm like, I'm going to take him to do the weirdest shit I can think of in Venice when he comes out here. And so I look up this church, and it's like some spiritual community organization that was started by this child actor, and like there's like articles in Vice about how it's a cult and like all this stuff. And I was just like, and I saw that they had a Sunday morning service there, and I was like, all right, we're gonna go to this church and like just see what happens, you know.
And what happened?
So yeah, so we went, and it just so happened to be Mother's Day, and they were doing this, you know, this Mother's Day service or whatever. And we walked in, and first of all, like the girl at the door, I remember her name is Angel. She ended up becoming a really good friend of mine, but ran up and just gave me the biggest hug, and like, you know, hugged my dad. And we just kind of walked in like, oh shit, what did we just get ourselves into, you know? And yeah, and we walk in, and like there's just people sort of sitting in a circle in this beautiful old church with all these very psychedelic like paintings hanging on the walls, and this really dope like mandala mural on the back of the little stage that they had. And it was mainly like younger people. And yeah, we just like sat through this service, and it was just so, it just felt, I don't even know how to explain it other than just like, it just felt like it fed some part of me that was really needing to be fed. And so we left, and we didn't really think too much of it. And then my dad, ended up going back home, and I ended up feeling like I kind of want to go back there next week. And so I did. And literally, immediately following that week's service, I emailed them like, hey, I'm looking for work right now. Do you guys need any help with anything? And they responded in 5 minutes and were like, can you come in tomorrow?
Perfect.
So I walked into this place, and essentially, long story short, I basically ended up like living there for the next 3 months straight, and then became like a core member of the team for the next year and a half. And I think what I realized after, spending more time there was that what was bringing me back was that I was being put in situations that were requiring me to practice vulnerability. Mm. And when I was allowing myself to go to that place, I was experiencing joy, which was like extremely unusual for me. I was not experiencing joy in any other place in my life. So
what about vulnerability? Was that something new for you as well, or is that something that you had some experience with?
I mean, I would say for the most part, it was new to me in the sort of extreme that they were practicing it there. Like the intentional vulnerability was new to me. And really the main, like I remember the thing that made me sort of connect the dots was that we were dancing. And I had this fear around dancing. It was always like, oh, what are people going to think of me? And I remember for a split second, like just getting out of my own way and like just stepping past that fear and just being happy, and so, yeah, I kept coming back, and I also just saw the possibility. I saw the possibility that these people were creating, and I wanted to be a part of, this sort of alternative culture that they were offering. And I'd never seen anything else like it in my life. It was, they had it all. They had the location, they had the people, they had the audience because of this celebrity that was running it. And they even had like press, like it was it was like a thing. They had the opportunity to really shift and influence culture. And so I was along for the ride for sure.
And what became of that? Like, you're clearly not there anymore. So did you just grow apart, or was there, you mentioned something about a cult in a Vice article. Now I'm all curious.
So I don't think it was a cult. It wasn't a cult really. It's just, how the media tends to, they like to sort of exaggerate and manipulate things in that way.
Especially when it's something they don't understand, right? I mean,
right.
You fear that. You got to put a label on it so you know what it is. And if it's a cult, then at least we know what it is, and everything's good.
Right. And there was never anything that I felt was culty about it, other than like it was a group of people who were trying to promote love and peace and justice, and that's pretty counterculture. So
it is, yeah. In these days, for sure.
Yeah. So but so what ended up happening was the building that we were operating out of, we were leasing it, and the owners decided to sell the building. So we did this whole campaign to try and buy it. We tried to find investors, and ultimately it didn't work out. So we all sort of dispersed into the world, and we were kind of waiting to see if the guy that founded this was ever gonna sort of, restart it somewhere else. He ended up being a new father at that time, and it just sort of, it went stagnant for a while. And for me, like, losing really the Sunday morning service was like a really big loss for me. But more so just having that sort of hub, for my community, it felt like a massive loss. And so after a while, I just kind of started feeling like, like, I'm gonna have to do this shit myself, because I just don't want to wait anymore. And so that's kind of where the idea for the Sunday morning thing started. I can't even remember where the idea for Neverland Tribe came from. I mean, the term Neverland is one that I use because my personal sort of theology now has been crafted using mythology from Peter Pan. So like that's kind of where that word comes from. But yeah, I don't know. There's something about creating a lifestyle brand that promotes this very particular way of living that is just, it feels so like a deep calling to me. And so it just sort of happened.
Yeah. Well, good job, man. Because when I saw the ad and I clicked on the website, I was immediately interested. So I was like, this looks good. I like this.
Yeah, which is crazy because 2 months ago, I didn't even have a website,
That is crazy, man. That's nuts.
But here's how it happened, though, is I started the service, and at the second service, there was a woman who had come to the first as well, who came to me and said, hey, I love what you're doing. I have a marketing company, and I want to help you build this thing pro bono.
Whoa.
And I was just like, what? Like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what this is. And anyways, she was the one who was like, okay, you have to have a website. Because I was hesitant at first. I don't know why, but in my mind initially, this was going to be like some underground thing that was totally like off grid almost, that I just didn't want to put it out there for some reason. And then as soon as she talked me into like starting to create the website, I started to see the potential, because I'm a very visual person. So like that's how I start building things, is just to start doing it, especially with like brands. I have to have a logo, I have to have that visual thing that I can see and grab onto, and then I can take it to the next level. And so like the website just kind of changed everything. And then at that point, the sort of big picture appeared, and it was revealing that this is essentially like a media group that is covering a very specific subculture.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question. If you had to describe Neverland Tribe, in a sort of a concise way, if it's possible, but you just did it. Well, what's the subculture? Let's talk about that, because you and I have kind of already talked about this a little bit via email, but like it's really hard to pin down what this subculture is, or if it's one or multiple subcultures kind of coming together like under an umbrella. So what by your definition or by your description, what's the subculture that you're operating in?
So this is one of the difficult things about my job right now, is like, what in the actual fuck are we talking about? So I call it the transformational scene. It is also called the conscious community.
Mm.
It is also called the New Age community. It, from what I understand, is a evolution of and sort of remnant of the counterculture movement that started in the 1960s, as well as the human potential movement that started around that same time as well. Yeah, the community that I see now is sort of a mashup of all of those things. The New Age vibe is definitely pretty strong. There's a lot of people healing people with crystals and Reiki and all that, shit, which, like, to each their own. That's a whole other topic. But I have a sort of definition here of the transformational scene that I wrote specifically when I was working on branding for Neverland Tribe. So this is how I define it. It's a community of people interested in the overall health, growth, and expansion of their relationships to themselves, other people, and the planet.
Mm. Yeah.
That's a big picture sort of description of this particular subculture. And that involves everything from physical health, mental health, spiritual health. Yeah,
the 4 quadrants, right? Mind, body, spirit, and whatever. Mind, heart, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, there's all these different ways to slice and dice it, but
right.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, another way that I like to explain it is it's a lifestyle that's rooted in self-love and self-examination instead of self-destruction and whatever the opposite of self-examination is.
Ignorance of self.
Yeah,
right?
ignorance. Yeah.
Well, and the problem with ignorance of self is you can put a lot of masks on when you don't know yourself, right? You could even convince yourself that you're a certain way, and in reality, everyone around you is like, he's not like that. So it's important to know yourself a little bit, right?
Yeah, and I think that the mainstream culture that I experienced growing up is one that essentially rewards self-destruction and rewards most of the sort of character traits that we consider to be negative. Selfishness, greed, like those are the things that we reward with more money and more power. And that is like, that's the shit that I'm like, fuck no, we got to burn that shit to the ground.
Absolutely, man. Well, you talked about relationships. I've been doing a lot of thinking on this topic, and I think that, really the key is that we are really dysfunctional in our relationships as a species, and not just to each other and the planet, but to abstract things like money, right? Our relationship to money is so toxic, and it doesn't make any sense because money is a symbol of wealth. In itself, it is worthless. If I drop you off on a deserted island with $1 million, who the fuck cares, right? Good luck, sir. You're a millionaire and you're about to die in about a week, right? So, but we've become obsessed with the superficial, the symbolic, the conceptual, and we're missing out on the actual reality that's fucking amazing. And it's full of wonder and awe. And if you just look past the screen, it's like, it's right in front of you. It's right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the process of going from someone who is so deeply rooted in the mainstream culture, the process of going from that into this person who is actively examining their thought processes and their behavioral patterns is like it's a very intense and very long and very challenging, but also like extremely rewarding process. And that's essentially what I feel like I've been going through for the better part of maybe 10 years, probably for about 6 of them, I didn't even really know what I was doing.
Right. Yeah. That's another difficulty, I think, of this path is that a lot of people stumble onto it and don't realize they're on a path, or they just think something's wrong with them, or they're going crazy or whatever. And it's like, oh, you just got off the highway. Now you're making your own way through this jungle. And that's what life should be, man. That's the goal, right? You got free will for a reason, not to follow other people's, footsteps. So
totally.
So I got to tell you, I suspected that you had come up in a religious tradition of some kind, just based on your response to my Bible quotes in the one article I shared with you. You're like, chill with the Bible quotes. And I was like, oh, all right, cool. Like, I don't care. I'm not attached to this book or anything. But right then I knew, I'm like, I bet you this guy's got post-religious trauma. Like, because people who come up in, especially in fundamentalist type religions, like the more fundamentalist it is, I find the more people have this kind of pendulum effect when they come out of it and they become hardcore atheists, or that, all religion is evil and all this stuff. But it's interesting to me that you realized at some point that religion actually does have a function, or something like religion, and you call it what you want. And, your Sunday thing is not an organized religion, but the community, the spiritual community is important. And then the fact that you're attaching all these other things to it, like music and the media side of it, I think this thing has the real potential. Forget the celebrity cult, man. You got something good going on right here.
Thanks, man. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I definitely have a little, quote unquote trauma from being raised Catholic, but and that also sort of affects my perspective of Christianity, still to this day. But I also, shortly after I landed in LA and walked into this, place, became obsessed with religion. And I actually just started reading spiritual texts, and I got my hand, like everything I could get my hands on. I had a copy of all of them. I was peeking through all of them. I was trying to figure out what the fucking deal was with all this shit. And first of all, like recognizing the patterns throughout all of them, and then recognizing the value in most of them, and I would say all of them. It allowed me to piece together my own personal sort of theology and belief system, and then really open the door for me to come back to this place of like, oh yeah, I do believe in God. It's not a white man in the sky. He's not up there on a throne, It is a universal omnipresence that exists in everything. And, it's not, that's the easy explanation, obviously. But, yeah, I found this very dehumanized, sort of more energetic, interpretation. I found that really felt true to me. And I also had experienced, I guess I've had experiences that made me feel really connected to that. So yeah, I forget what your original question was now, but
We're just talking about post-religious trauma and stuff like
trauma.
that. And
I know what else I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I have a lot of post-religious trauma with Christianity because I think that it's actually, I personally have experienced more hypocrisy from Christian people than I have experienced with any other religion. And it is especially prevalent in the like evangelical scene. Like you said, the more sort of hardcore they are, the more it gets weird.
Yeah.
But like I call them Hypochristians.
Are you kidding me? I thought I coined that term, bro.
Oh yeah, no, I've been saying that for years.
Oh man, great minds think alike. I've been calling them Hypochristians for so long. I'm like, they don't even know. If Jesus was here, he'd be fucking flipping out on them.
Yeah. So that shit pisses me off. Like I actually I get angry about that, especially because like my family is that, so it hits close to home for me. And I also I get frustrated because I see the potential that these massive multi-million-dollar mega churches have, where they're pulling in 50,000 people a week. And it's like, they're doing good shit, they're building schools in Africa or whatever, but like, they're also just keeping people in this space of there is something wrong with you when you were born.
Yeah, that's rough.
So you're right off the bat limiting everything that you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense that you would inherit, some dude's sin from like 6,000 years ago. I think it was Oscar Wilde who calls it original virtue. He says disobedience is humankind's original virtue. All progress is made through disobedience and rebellion. So I think that's a better way of looking at that story.
Totally. Yeah. But I also just think that like everything that's happening and everything that's ever happened is perfect and
Mm-hmm.
has happened exactly how it's supposed to be. So like the idea that somebody is born imperfect is just so absurd to me and just so strange, and just feels like it's purely like just preying off of people's insecurities.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
The notion of original sin, and then also the notion that you're saved if you just believe in this Jesus guy, like there's a reason that Christians are overrepresented in prisons. It's like, well, just pray for forgiveness. Everything's good. Like,
And you're done. Yeah.
yeah, it absolves you of responsibility because you're born a sinner and you can just be forgiven. So it's like the
For
ultimate,
anything you do.
yeah, it's the ultimate blow off. It's like, why did he give you free will for? You don't need it. You just do whatever you feel like and everything's going to work out. So, yeah.
But I also don't want to discredit like I guess what I would say is that there's a lot of people whose lives have been drastically improved by adopting a Christian faith.
Absolutely.
That, you can't discredit that. Like there's a lot of good that has been done in the name of Christianity. On the flip side, Christianity has been responsible for committing mass genocide and war and fucking God knows what else for millennia.
Yeah, I would just say that it's not Christianity, it's people.
Well, yeah,
who are using Christianity kind of as a scapegoat, because if you actually read what Jesus said, the Crusades don't happen.
Right.
If you actually read what Jesus said, a lot of the stuff that's happening down in your neck of the woods in the US is not happening. And, the very people oftentimes who are the loudest sort of evangelicals, they're the Pharisees, man. They're the ones that Jesus was flipping tables and yelling at and whipping them with it. And, he was an enlightened dude, but he got angry too, Anthony. So I get your frustrations sometimes with the hypocrisy. Yeah. And I see both sides of it as well. I mean, my parents, when I was 21, became Jehovah's Witnesses. My parents are uneducated. My dad, raging alcoholic for most of his life. Well, maybe not raging, but definitely had a drinking problem. And then he got into some other stuff. This thing changed them. It transformed them when they got into it. And at first I thought, wow, this is amazing. Like they've been transformed into new people. But as time wore on, I realized they were basically just the same people. They just shifted some of their baggage around. And actually, in some ways, they were a lot worse off. So, it's maybe a comforting lie, but is it really worth adopting, for right. the sake of inner peace? Like, I don't know. I'd rather have a hard truth.
Right. And maybe we're just a different breed, but I also, it is important to point out that Christianity isn't solely responsible for all of those things that I just listed, obviously, but it is the major player in the West, and like a lot of everything that we've done has sort of been in the name of Jesus.
And yeah, he would not be thrilled to hear that based on what I know of the guy.
I started really, really understanding what the Bible was in college. I took a class called The Bible as Literature, and we read it from a purely historical and cultural perspective. And it totally just opened my eyes to the fact that, like, first of all, the version of the Bible that we have today was written over the course of about 300 years by like countless different people, some of whom we don't even know. Like it's also been edited many, many times by kings of empires that wanted it to say a very specific thing. And so it's just like how anyone could read that text as literal truth or, take it as anything other than just another source of inspiration is just beyond me.
Yeah, I'm with you. Oh, good night.
I'm not going to bed. I'm going shopping now.
Oh, you're going shopping. Okay, have fun. Well, I got 14 minutes. Is Cyrus asleep?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thumbs up.
Well, kind of.
Found it. All right. Have a good one. It's not an episode of The Big Questions, Anthony, if I don't get interrupted by at least one child.
Nice.
I knew it was going to happen eventually.
Nice.
Yeah. No, I get it, man. Same here. And you know what? To some extent, if it caused no harm, I think I would have a less problem with it. But I think it's because, like you said, they have a huge platform, some of these mega churches. And imagine if they were spouting off about something practically useful, instead of telling you you're born a sinner, if they were if they were preaching what you're describing, right? Self-love, vulnerability, things that are actually going to help you grow as a person. Imagine the change that they would enact. It would be sweeping.
Here's my experience of it. I love going back to my old church and just experiencing it because, first of all, it's basically like going to a Broadway concert or Broadway play mixed with a rock concert. It's fucking epic. They do a really great job of tugging on your heartstrings and the whole 9 yards, And the things that they talk about, I'm like, yes, fuck yeah, let's go build schools in Africa for poor people. And let's be better people for our communities. And let's spread messages of love and positivity. And then it always comes back to for Jesus. And I'm just like, wait, but hold up. Why don't we just stop before we get to that part? And just do all that shit because we want to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, instead of doing it for a reward or to stave off eternal damnation, right?
Yeah. Why don't we just do it?
Yeah.
Because we're good, because we're dope humans.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And that's something that actually speaks to me in Taoism and in Stoic philosophy as well, is the whole idea of doing something for its own sake instead of doing it for, a further means to an end or whatever. Yeah. Finding intrinsic value in what you're doing just for its own sake instead of always having some further end in sight, right? It takes a lot of stress and pressure out of life when you're not worried about the outcome, because it doesn't matter what the outcome is. You just did the thing because you wanted to do the thing. It was the right thing to do. It felt good, and that's it.
Right, and we can't control the outcome anyway, so why pretend like we can? Yeah,
or put undue importance on it because it might not go your way, and then if that's all you're caring about, you're going to be stressed or upset, right? It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, man, that's awesome. And how did you get, because you mentioned that you sort of had some experience with Stoicism as well, and how did you get into that one? Was that part of your religion binge when you just kind of started reading?
Yeah, that was one of the books that I read, and I read the Meditations, and I was just like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And it was one of those books that I couldn't put it down, and it was like every line I read, I was like, oh my God, what, and also like the whole fact that we had essentially this diary of a Roman emperor, that he didn't even know people were going to be reading. It's not often that you come across a text like that is so profound, and it was just some guy taking notes to himself, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just so happened to be one of the most powerful people in the world at a time in the world that was also so interesting,
Totally. Yeah, and I love the fact that he constantly reminds himself that no one's going to remember his name in a generation. Yeah. And then here we are 2,000 years later talking about the guy
reading his journal.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny how things work, man. Providence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then I also I dove into it a lot more with a podcast actually called Stoicism on Fire. There's a guy, I believe his name's Chris Fisher. He created this podcast called Stoicism on Fire. It's really, really fucking badass. I'm not a podcast dude. I've never listened to podcasts. I haven't ever really been that much of an avid reader in my life, really. I'm much more experiential. But yeah, this podcast just sucked me right in, and it goes very in depth into traditional Stoicism. And I was eating it up for sure.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, I often wonder what would have happened if, it hadn't been stamped out by the early Christians, and if it had been allowed to continue. Like maybe maybe that would be the mainstream religion of the West, and very easily. It's like Western Buddhism in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can only hope that we'll get to the point again where it is the most prominent,
Well, it's starting to come back, right?
Well, that podcast is interesting because he makes sure to stress that there's a difference between, I think he calls it modern Stoicism and traditional Stoicism. So there's a lot, like Stoicism has sort of had this revival in the West, but it's essentially been stripped of all of its spiritual sort of underbelly, or whatever you want to call it. And basically this guy's argument is it's not actually Stoicism if you don't believe in a providential universe, because that was like at the core of everything that they were doing.
Yeah.
So not to say that modern Stoicism isn't valuable, but for me, I was more intrigued by, including the concept of providence in whatever way that, you would define that. But it definitely fit into sort of what I was learning about my existence as a physical and metaphysical being in this world.
Yeah, I like you. I read the meditations first, and it actually is what kind of ignited. Again, like yourself, I was pretty much an atheist for a lot of years, most of my life. So that was the catalyst for seeing sort of the fact that there is a higher power, that there's an order or an intelligence out there, in here, everywhere. And it was thanks to Marcus Aurelius. His theology, his spirituality totally was like glove in hand for me. I was like, This is it. I was like, finally, I found something that makes sense and isn't ridiculous, and I can actually believe it without feeling like, someone who's a little bit ignorant. So yeah, that was huge for me. And then Seneca too, he's got so much, spirituality in there. They're pantheists, right? They see God in everything. And I think that's a beautiful way of going through life.
Yeah, I really love that term, actually. It feels right.
It's one of the few words that I've been able to actually take on and go, yeah, I am a pantheist. Like I feel comfortable. Like one of the very few ones, because I wouldn't consider myself a Stoic. I think that labels kind of limit you, but pantheism is a pretty broad one.
Yeah, it feels right. And yeah, I mean, I think with all this stuff, like I'm still so, it's funny because I have so many books and I've barely read any of them, And I'm just like, man, I have all these books that I still want to read, but I've already learned so much just from the small amount that I have read. I'm like, I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface.
I don't know, man. It seems like it's just always the same, especially in this sphere. If you've caught on to the sort of main themes of like impermanence, know thyself, there's like probably a handful of things. They just come up over and over again, separated by millennia, but
that's what I really started, to find in all the spiritual texts and all that. But yeah, I mean, obviously I'm a lifelong student, and evolution is real and everything's constantly changing. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, so there's aspects of the sort of practical in Neverland Tribe, right? You're concerned about the individual leading a happy, healthy life, loving yourself. All these things are very practical and immediate, but that doesn't prevent you from also going into the metaphysical and the sort of more lofty, mystical, spiritual side of things as well.
Well, it's all a part of the same thing. Like you can't talk about helping people improve their quality of life without talking about the physical and the metaphysical aspects of our existence, because they're so interconnected that there is no separation between the two. So if we're eating a bad diet, we're going to feel it in our physical body and also in our metaphysical body.
Absolutely. And the same can be said in the reverse, right? I mean, if you're depressed, you can get physical discomfort, aches, pains from being mentally or psychologically depressed, right?
I mean, the physical symptoms, I've have struggled with depression and a generalized anxiety disorder for over 10 years. And the physical manifestations of both of those things are the hardest part for me, honestly.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, it's like, it's easy to include that in all of this because it's actually critical that we include it in all of this.
Yeah, I agree. I liken it to the two sides of a coin, right? You can't have heads without tails. You can't have matter without spirit, right? Matter is the vehicle for spirit. Spirit is what drives the vehicle. So
yeah, I mean,
on board.
The main thing that I know is that there's much more happening here than I'm able to experience with my physical body.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's like, that's all I need.
I know that there's a lot I don't know.
That. Yeah, like, let me just acknowledge that and go from there. So
yeah.
I don't let me plug in my computer real quick. I brought up the sort of new age scene a little bit earlier. There's a lot of people out here in LA that experience energy in a very different way than I do. There's people who are doing distance energy healing sessions, and people who are shamanic practitioners that are traveling between dimensions and talking to spirits, and people who can't be around a Wi-Fi router without getting a migraine. It's like, I don't experience that metaphysical, if you want to call it that, world in that way, really, or at least I haven't yet. And maybe it's that I just haven't opened up to it enough. But I think for me, it's more of just an acknowledgement that there is something else going on. Like, there's other parts of my existence that are affecting my being and affecting my quality of life in ways that I don't fully understand.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And that's the best way to be, in my opinion. Open, right? Curious, open. Doesn't mean you believe everything, but you're at least open to possibilities. And so, then that way you're not closing yourself off from anything that you could be missing out on, right?
That's what I'm saying. And a lot of my old friends, or even, some of my family members, they'll look at my community and be like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, you're healing yourself with crystals? Like, what is she doing? Why is she, like, doing energy work or whatever it is? And for me, it's like, they're not hurting anybody. Mm-hmm. Like, if they're helping people, then that's dope. Isn't that what we're all trying to do? Like, yeah. Also, like, I am not in no position to, like, tell people whether or not something that they believe in is true, So I just have fun with it. And I think I make fun of it a lot. Everybody that I know knows that I do that, because I'm just like, this is fucking insane. Like, what are we doing? But also, like, I also love it because it is weird, and it is unusual, and it is interesting, and it is like, it's cool to think about, like, somebody being able to heal somebody's energy field without even touching them, like, I hope we can do that shit.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And right? If not, we're not hurting anything. So, like, let's just pretend,
Yeah, well, the placebo effect is a real thing. And so, in my opinion, at the very least, if people are getting help from it, if it's helping them, at the very least, it's a placebo. And if it's more than that, then that's even better. Because as you said, then that means that the sky's the limit, and we can do a lot more than we think we can.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said about, like, the power of our creativity and imagination, which I think we actually place so many restrictions on. But, like, the reality is that our creativity and imagination are boundless. And really, I don't think we truly understand the full potential of them, of both of those things together. So, the concept of manifestation, for example, is one that my community talks about quite a bit. And that's one of those things that like somebody in mainstream culture is going to be like, what are you talking about, you crazy person? You
Sure.
know? But the reality is that like, we know that our thoughts and our actions directly have a direct influence on what's happening in our lives. If you think that you're sad, then you're sad. You
Yeah.
know,
If you think
that's
sad
not,
thoughts.
yeah, that's not some woo-woo hippie bullshit. That's science. You know, like we've proven that shit.
You can prove it to yourself by doing it right
You
now
can
if you
prove it
want,
to yourself by doing it. Yeah. So it's like, who's to say that, you know, saying a mantra 20 times every day isn't going to bring you wealth? If it's true that when I think that I'm sad now, who's to say that when I'm speaking out into the world, I'm rich, that there isn't some mechanism happening that is now attracting that to me? You know, for me, the possibility of that type of mechanism being a real thing is much more likely than not.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely something to it for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
Perspective shapes your reality. So
Yeah.
if you change your perspective, if you change your thoughts, everything else is going to change as well.
Exactly.
Even though nothing might change, you know, materially, but for you, everything will seem different. So very cool, man. And you know, on that note, I also think like manifestation, I think synchronicities, you know, these so-called coincidences that always come up. Like, for example, the second time you do one of your Sunday services, a woman comes out and says, I'm going to market for you for free. Like, that's the universe saying, right this way, Sir
right.
Anthony. Yeah, this is the path right here.
And you can't, I mean, like, and that's how this whole thing has unfolded for me, really. I mean, yeah, you showed up. I don't know who you are. You know, you're some dude in Vancouver that's like, bro, this is tight. Let's do it, you know?
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, and then the fact that I even saw your ad, and, you know, again, like I see lots of ads and I'm like, oh, that looks cool. And I just scroll by. But for whatever reason, man, there was something about yours and I knew there was something here. Now, what happens from here on in, who knows? But I think that even at this point, this was a worthwhile decision on both of our parts.
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, dude, I 2 days ago had the idea to create a music festival celebrating, you know, the transformational scene. And I have 25 artists already confirmed. I have a girl that came on to do the graphic design. Like, it's one of those things where, you know, everybody always says like, oh, if you're truly doing, you know, what you're meant to be doing, then it's just going to happen. And like that's what it feels like is happening, you know, with this project right now. So
yeah, man.
I'm gonna ride the wave.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah, Joseph Campbell, he said, follow your bliss, and then the universe will open doors for you. And that's exactly what's happening to you, my friend.
Hey, if Joseph Campbell said it, then it has to be true.
He knew what he was talking about. Awesome. Well, I got to head out, but it was great chatting with you. And yeah, we'll circle back and talk about this video and how you want to do it and how you want to deploy it.
Dope, dude. Awesome. Yeah. Good talking to you as well. Thanks for letting me download. And yeah, like I said, I haven't really done this yet with somebody. So it was nice to be challenged in that way a little bit, you know?
Yeah. Well, we were going back and forth in those emails and I was like, I had way too many questions for this guy. Like I wanted to know all kinds of things. And I was like, you know what? Let's just try to talk in person instead. Yeah.
That's cool. Peace, dude. Take care.
Have a good night. Cheers.